Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third biennial New York City Food Waste Fair. Before we get started, I wanted to give everyone a few reminders. I know we started a little bit late and I apologize. We ran into some technical difficulties. Reminder one, please use the Q&A box to submit questions to all of our panelists. They have incredible things to say, incredible experience. So please use the Q&A box to submit your questions. Check out foodwastefair.com for the remaining schedule for the next 2 days of the Food Waste Fair. Today we have one more panel and we have some more other events that are on the schedule, foodwastefair.com. And please check out our food waste toolkit where you can find a resource guide on how to reduce your food waste for New York City businesses and residents. And without further ado, I would love to introduce Senator Jessica Ramos, who will be moderating today's panel.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Ramos. I'm the state senator representing District 13 in Queens in the New York State Senate. That's the neighborhoods of Jackson Heights, Corona, East Elmhurst, Northern Astoria, parts of Woodside, and Elmhurst. Well, we're most renowned for our food here, but in the past year, our notoriety comes from being the epicenter of the pandemic. Unfortunately, at the peak of the pandemic, we really were in dire straits here. We lost many loved ones, like many other neighborhoods across the city, and we really experienced a tough time figuring out how to help our neighbors keep their roof over their heads and be able to feed their families. And that's why I'm so happy to be here today to be talking about food waste, because despite having so many restaurants in our district, despite having some supermarkets, not enough, and certainly not at the affordability that we need them. We had a lot of folks going hungry. In fact, I don't know if this statistic is still the most recent, but about 1.5 million New Yorkers go to bed hungry every day in the greatest city in the world, where we cook delicious food, where unfortunately, we see 40% of that food actually go to waste. And that's really why we're here, because we want to connect the dots. We want to figure out how we can help all New Yorkers access food and hopefully healthy food. Everybody knows I'm a big fan of the farms. Not only am I the granddaughter of a coffee farmer, but passing the the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act now 2 years ago, I was really looking to bring equity to the workplace upstate. One of the last vestiges of the Jim Crow era in New York was how farm workers had been left out of the labor law for many, many years. Up until 2 years ago, farm workers in New York State didn't have the right to a day off, didn't have the right to overtime pay, didn't have the right to unemployment insurance, which ended up being really helpful during the pandemic. But more than that, we were very lucky here in the district that because all of the restaurants had closed down at the peak of the pandemic, farmers were left with a great surplus of fruit, vegetables, dairy, and even some meat. And because I had passed that law, I had already established those relationships with farms upstate. Even if they were testifying against my bill at the hearings, I was able to count on them in our darkest hour to help send that surplus of produce down here to Queens. So we were actually bringing down approximately 30,000 pounds of food every week, feeding about 2,000 families. And really what we were looking at was all of the reports of these farmers dumping milk and dumping cabbage and dumping onions. And we don't want that to happen. We should not be dumping food, not only in New York State, but we shouldn't be dumping food anywhere. And I'm really happy that we're talking about this today. And I'm joined by some awesome folks who know a lot more about this than I do. So we're going to be learning a lot more about food waste together and how we can fight it so that we can keep people fed. And more importantly, our children need nutritious food every day in order to be ready to learn and tackle the day and hopefully be able to reach their full potential and be much better adults than we've ever been. So joining me this morning is Kate MacKenzie. She is the director of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy. Hey, MacKenzie. We have Racine Droz, the director of Donor Relations and Supply Chain Management at City Harvest, and Rick Whitted, CEO of U.S. Hunger. I'm going to give you folks a few minutes, perhaps, to introduce yourselves, kind of like I just did. Who you are, what you're about, and what brings you to the panel. So let's start with you, Kate. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. How are you? It's so great. I really need to take a moment with incredible gratitude and appreciation for your exemplary leadership in this state and beyond, particularly for calling out everything that you just mentioned, but also our essential food workers and food delivery workers. You are such a hero to this state. I'm Kate MacKenzie, and I am the director of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy. I oversee and lead a lot of the COVID food response, as well as many other non-COVID responses to the food crises that the city is experiencing. I'm looking forward to talking about all of that, but I want to appreciate, it's so great to see my colleague Racine. I come from many years of working at City Harvest prior to my appointment here in this position. And for the last 20 years have really been doing what I can to address food inequity in this city. And again, such a great intro by the Senator Ramos about why food policy is needed and why I'm so pleased to have produced the city's first ever 10-year food policy plan that articulates not just why we need to ensure that all New Yorkers get fed, but also that we are making sure that people in the food system are paid well and that we have good transportation systems to bring that food from the region and from upstate into the city to provide markets for great, affordable, and nutritious food for all. I know we're behind schedule, so I'm going to stop there. I can't wait to chat with my terrific colleagues here. And thank you to the Sanitation Foundation for organizing this event.
Yes, thank you, Kate. Racine, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Ramos. And I also want to second Kate's thanks. This is an honor to be here today, and thank you, Department of Sanitation, for having us today. And just to give you some background, so I work for City Harvest, which is New York City's largest food rescue organization. So we help feed more than 1.5 million New Yorkers struggling to put food on their tables. So this year we will rescue and deliver 153 million pounds of food. And that's a huge increase from what we did last fiscal year. And that's all due to our response to COVID. So I oversee our local team, which is responsible for all the local donations that come in from the 5 boroughs. I also oversee our repack team, which started during COVID, which is packing large bulk items into individual meals that are easily distributed to families in need at our markets and emergency sites. I also oversee our transportation team and also our command center that is responsible for overseeing all parts of the supply chain. So I am so happy to be here today, and I will make it short because I know we're behind time, but thank you.
All right, awesome, Racine. Thanks for joining us. Rick.
Thank you, Senator.
Are you here in New York as well?
I am sitting in sunny Orlando, Florida, with a lot of clouds today. But I'm really glad to be here, and thanks for having us, and to the Sanitation Fund as well. I think this is a great topic. You know, a year and a half ago or a little bit more, there's this thing called COVID that happened, and our organization really flipped upside down. We have for a decade coordinated bringing volunteers together across the country and packing meals and sending those to more than 53 countries, primarily in the US, but more than 53 countries. And you can't coordinate that kind of effort in the middle of a pandemic. And our organization went through a vast pivot and shift to technology. And so we used our distribution infrastructure and began shipping boxes of food across the country, several thousand homes in the New York area through a virtual platform. And lo and behold, we captured a lot of information that really gave us insight into hunger. And so I'm really happy to talk about that today, and I'll keep it short as well.
Well, Rick, actually, what do you think is the most common misconception about hunger?
Well, what we have learned is that it's not about food. Food is usually the outcome. And it is absolutely needed. And when you think about the work that our organization and City Harvest and the mayor's office and others are doing, it's critical. We capture stories, and because our platform is discreet, it's private, and folks are comfortable with sharing. And with nearly 70,000 stories, they're not talking about food. They're talking about bills and access to healthcare and medical bills and housing. It's never about food.
Well, that's true. I mean, I'll tell you, when the idea with helping people with food was really just to help them kind of penny pinch and save some money. You guys know I represent a lot of undocumented folks, among them delivery workers. I also represent the largest cohort of restaurant workers and hospitality workers in the city of New York. It's pretty crazy that they are in turn the ones most often going hungry. And so I agree, it really is the outcome of poverty and, the lack of good jobs. This is where the labor chair plugs in union jobs. And really, I think this is something that unfortunately we've seen in the city for a very long time. In New York, hunger has been an issue. I mean, this is why we brought free breakfast and lunch to New York City schools. And so I'm wondering, Kate, if you can talk a little bit about what the city's food policy plan is like, because the city's focus on food policy has really come into play in the past few years. I mean, we were lucky that, we had a food czar, and this was made much more of a priority than it's ever been before. I know there's a food forward NYC plan. What does that look like for the city, especially now after technically, I guess we're kind of in pandemic mode, but what does that mean what's the city's food plan?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And you're right, like we are really bridging this emergency to recovery. I think we're on the downward, hopefully, trend of the emergency. But to be clear, we are still operating our COVID responses, namely Get Food NYC, in which any New Yorker, who cannot leave their home to get meals and has no one to get meals for them, and can't afford private delivery, we will deliver meals to you. We've delivered more than 200 million meals over the course of the pandemic. We are supporting Racine and her network and the city's network of emergency food providers, again, with New York State product and more, specifically through what's called PFRED, our Pandemic Food Reserve Emergency Distribution Program. And many other programs, specifically schools that are serving any New Yorker, again, with meals, including adults, and that will, of course, continue into the summer months. But Food Forward NYC, we needed to capitalize on this moment where, thanks to the leadership of people like you, have put food very much on the front of people's minds and the full elements of the food system, right? So Food Forward is the city's first 10-year plan. It has 5 overarching goals. I'm not going to get into all of the details, but nyc.gov/foodforward. But specifically, I'll just highlight these goals where you can see the 75 different strategies and actions that that we'll implement over the course of the next decade. But we want all New Yorkers, and again, specifically people who are challenged with putting food on the table, to have access to healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food, no matter where they are. If they're going to a soup kitchen or a food pantry, fantastic. We want to make sure that there's food there. If they're on their way to work and need extra money to help buy some food at the grocery store, we want to be able to support them. We want to make sure that our food economy drives economic opportunity and provides good jobs. You have just spoken to this. We need a whole session just on good food jobs, but we want to make sure that our food policy is supporting of that. We need to make sure that our food supply chains that Racine knows so well are feeding New Yorkers in modern, efficient, and resilient ways, that they're supporting the environment and not contributing to more environmental injustices. Sustainability, this foundation, Sanitation Foundation, has been so prominent in this space. We need to make sure that the food that we produce is disposed of in sustainable ways. And we need to make sure that all community members have the tools that they know that they need to be able to make smart decisions and help us in implementing this 10-year plan. It's not a government does it alone. It's all New Yorkers making wise decisions and helping us and telling us also what we need to continue to do. So I'm more than thrilled to be able to talk about this plan, but also can't wait to work with all of you on this call in implementing that plan.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that food supply chain for a second. I mean, because again, you know, we're in New York City, everything is supposedly readily available. You know, as policy folks, you know, we really talk about affordable housing, we talk about many other things and perhaps put more importance on that. But we know that people who are well fed are better prepared for the day and better prepared to work and better prepared to tap into their creativity. And yet we have entire neighborhoods, you know, that don't have an affordable supermarket or that don't have a supermarket at all. And I know we call them food deserts. Really, it's food apartheid. That's what it is. You know, I think of East Elmhurst in my district. 11369 is the zip code. East Elmhurst was at the peak, the neighborhood with the most amount of deaths because they don't have a doctor. Forget a clinic, they don't have a private doctor. But also they only have one supermarket. And it's not easy to get to, and it is not very affordable. You know, why is that? Racine, can you talk a little bit, because I know you guys do such a great job collecting food and figuring out kind of who, you know, connecting with restaurants that are throwing away stuff. How do you guys go about connecting and figuring out who's wasting food and then figuring out the neighborhoods that need it the most and getting it there? How do y'all do what you do?
Just to give you some context, our programs help help food insecure New Yorkers access nutritious food, and that fits their needs and desires. So pretty much what City Harvest says is we provide a supplement, right? So a lot of New Yorkers have to make very hard decisions, whether they have to pay rent, do they purchase medication, and a lot of that requires money. So to make that choice, it's difficult. So City Harvest provides food free of charge, where that's one less hard decision that a client or a New Yorker has to make. So now they're saying, okay, I can actually pay my bills because now I have enough ingredients to make a meal. And how we go about that is we have over 2,000 local donors in New York City. And we also have national donors, and that's because we're under Feeding America. So we work with their national donors, and then we also have a network of partners that we work with the food banks that are under Feeding America. So locally, we're pretty much in a good position where a lot of donors come and reach out to us, but we do actively approach other donors to see what the opportunities are. So we pick up from all areas of the food industry. So we pick up from restaurants, We pick up from wholesalers, supermarkets, and we vet them to make sure, of course, that the product is safe. We do food safety checks. We inspect the location and work with the partners. And the one thing that we do that's great is that we make sure that we route when we pick up our donations. We also make sure that we put them on our routes where it goes back to the communities that we picked it up from. So if a donor is listed, for example, we use the Bronx or Queens, wherever we pick up, we make sure that we distribute it within that area so that the donor also feels comfortable knowing that they're giving right back to their communities. And what else do we have a bunch of donors also. We work with large manufacturers outside of the 5 boroughs. And it's just a big network of donors that we work with.
All right, but there's still a lot of restaurants throwing out food. How do you not recruit, but how do you connect with these restaurants? How do you make it known? Hey, hey restaurant, like we can go pick up whatever is left over from your day. How does that part work?
Yeah, so we do actively work with, we have a lot of chefs on our food council that help not only with their own restaurants, but then they also help us reach out, do some outreach to other restaurants. So when we speak to them, we pretty much say, hey, rather than throwing this food out, let's see how we can give it back to the community so that we can and a lot of the times they're like, yeah, it's a no-brainer. Of course, we're gonna give you the food that we have, our surplus. So we have Chef Special program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but what we do is we work with restaurants where they create meals for 50 plus people, and then they distribute that to, we do pickups as well for that. And then we also work with them to, like during COVID, we work very closely with the restaurant industry. We know a lot of restaurants had to furlough their staff. And one way that they were trying to keep their doors open was having their staff still prepare meals, and then they donated it to City Harvest. So we work with hundreds of restaurants during COVID. We work with hundreds of donors, restaurants now. And it's just a no-brainer that they should be donating whatever surplus or preparing meals in addition to their operations to City Harvest, to companies like City Harvest.
Wow. And I imagine, technology must really be able to facilitate what you guys are doing. I know, Rick, for you guys, using new mapping technology really made a difference during the pandemic, right? In helping pinpoint where most help is needed. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it did. And it really was eye-opening for us. I think, for the first decade of our organization's history, we were just really focused on solving the problem that we all have articulated around the need to help people not to just have food, but to have quality food. When we started putting data around it and analytics and geo mapping around it, what we realized is we had to start changing the conversation from are they hungry to asking a question, why are they hungry in the first place? And that data just really allows you to see that. And so our mission has really changed in the sense of yes, we want to feed families today, but our real goal is to help unite them to healthy outcomes. And so when we look at the data, just in the New York area, 67% of the applicants that come in to us, we don't solicit or market, they just find us online. They live in those food apartheid areas. And so here's a really scary connection. 74% of those New Yorkers also self-report chronic illnesses. And those top ones are diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, hypertension, some real nasty diseases that can really impact your wallet, your quality of life, etc. And so food plays a big part in that. But when you are doing what all of the panelists are doing here, really providing food in a way that's dignified and in a way that says you matter and you care, you tend to build social connection, and people will engage you and they will have those conversations. And so we're using those stories. We say data, that's a little impersonal. It's their story, and we're using their story to understand why they're asking in the first place. And I think as we work toward getting to that answer, we will all work a little less harder. All of us on the screen are working really hard to make a difference and an impact. And I think it's about understanding root causes. And so that's where data really and technology can allow you to highlight details that it's hard to see when you're so fast moving in motion and so much is happening. And so systems and machine learning and algorithms, believe it or not, they do work. They allow you to catch things you would miss by the naked eye. So,
you know, it's true. Food is really what brings us together, right? It brings families together, it brings friends together, and yet, unfortunately, even though it's such an essential determining factor of what our health outcomes will be, we still live in a world where, you know, buying McDonald's is cheaper than buying healthy food. Or the other issue that I ran into actually when I was distributing produce was that a lot of, especially the delivery worker guys, don't have kitchens, don't have where to cook food, or don't know how to cook food, and would come and ask, well, okay, great, you gave me cabbage, you gave me onions, you gave me, you know, peppers, what do I do with this? And so I feel like, you know, for me, we don't talk about food in education in our formative years at all, or at least not enough. I mean, I had home ec at IS-10, shout out to IS-10 in Astoria, Queens. I had home ec, Miss Williams was great. She even taught me how to make grits and like all sorts of good stuff. But that is not really the case any longer. And I really do believe that this is an important life skill, knowing how to eat, right? Knowing that protein is what builds muscle, knowing that, you know, how to make healthier decisions. Kate, how is the city thinking about that? Is that in the food plan?
Yeah.
How is the city
yes.
about making sure that we know about food and our relationship with food is a healthy one?
Yes, thank you for lifting that up. You're of course correct. You know, one thing I also experienced in doing so many food distributions is making sure that the food that we're distributing is what's desired, right? And so this, our program
A little shaky.
right now.
Is anyone else having a little trouble hearing Kate? Yeah, she's sounding a little robotic, right?
Is we put some special orders in specifically for apples and angles.
No. I think we lost Kate. I'm sure she's gonna come back. But Racine, Rick,
There we go.
All right, she's back.
There we go. I got booted off real quickly.
All right.
So I wanted to bridge real quickly also to talking about, you know, the city is also spends more than $500 million a year on food that we buy to feed New Yorkers. And that's specifically through places, not just our schools, which everybody knows about, but our correction system, our homeless shelters, our senior centers. So many of these meals that we're feeding New Yorkers, we want to make sure that we're not just dealing with their appropriate nutrition, but also making sure that we're buying food from people with good labor practices, that we're buying food from people that are environmentally aware. So we're looking, and this is again something that making sure that with the Good Food Purchasing Program, we're holding ourselves accountable to the values that we aspire to. So, you know, and part of that is also about education. And so I think that this is, yes, about learning how to cook, but also making sure that people are aware that their food decisions and what they buy is not just about what they're putting on their plate that night, that food has a story all before it even got to our plate. So that's certainly, again, within that goal number 5 about making sure that we're building knowledge and awareness about our whole food system. And that when you're buying food, that's a political action. And what you're buying is you're determining what food you're putting on your plate by where that food is coming from.
You know, I'm so happy you mentioned prison food. You know, a few weeks ago, Brian Lair did a show on WNLP, which was so powerful, you know, talking about how little prisons leave in their budget for food, how it's weaponized against incarcerated people. And of course, hungry people are going to get violent, you know, and of course, people who are not being fed healthy food, that are being fed expired food many times, or food with mold, you know, they of course are going to react, their bodies are going to react in undesired ways.
And you know, Senator, you know, I immediately, I heard that story too. And I reached out to our lovely, the senior director of nutrition in the New York City Department of Corrections to say, Glenn, you need to get your story out there, because what New York City is doing is actually, again, leading in how it serves and the types of foods that it serves. It's the people in the facilities. So for example, we have, much like the schools have taste tests of the product to make sure that the kids actually want to eat what they're serving. That's happening at Rikers. That's happening at other facilities.
Well, I have to say, I was on Rikers a few weeks ago, and one of the biggest complaints that I received was about the food, about it not being enough, about it not being good quality. It was really disheartening. I mean, especially—
Thank you for raising it.
In the you know, detention centers where we have the younger kids who are trying to figure out how to get out. And for those of you who might not be from New York and are watching us, you know, Rikers Island is a pre-trial detention center that needs to be shut down. It's just really unfortunate to see, you know, 50 men who are hungry, because even the food items offered in the commissary are high in sodium, right? Ready to microwave type of things, and are very expensive, which I actually have a bill to fix, because I don't believe that food items in commissaries should be exponentially more expensive than, you know, the price for things out in the neighborhoods where these guys are from. But to me, nutrition, you know, it's called the correction department. Not a lot of correction happens, but like to me, the rehabilitation and the correction that does need to happen starts with food and how we're feeding our bodies and how we're feeding our souls. And you know, I appreciate your perspective, Kate, and I would love to hear, of course, from Rick and Racine as well, perhaps how you're looking at some of the members of our society who have perhaps the poorest access to healthy food and don't have a choice, right? They have to eat what's available. They have to eat what's given. What can we do to help our incarcerated people eat better?
So I think it's not just incarcerated individuals. I think it's communities, right? Because we also have to think of the families that are visiting those that are incarcerated. So I just want to, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the Nourish New York program. So I think that's a fantastic program because that helps City Harvest source more nutritious food during a time when our typical avenues of receiving food were disrupted. So I think the success of this program showed that it's something that should be implemented, not just in times of crisis. It's a program that supports our food system as a whole. And by uplifting farmers who have been facing market disruption and by providing a vehicle for food banks to support small farmers and dairy farmers that may have not had the opportunity to work with the traditional food donation models. So that's something I think we can do as a group to kind of advocate for those programs so that we can not only support the programs that are offered to incarcerated individuals, but I also think it also serves the families that are visiting them in the communities that we all live in.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I see a lot, we're getting a lot of questions. It's true. I mean, in our communities, right, where a lot of these affected families live, you know, we've had to figure out how to fend for ourselves. And during the pandemic, you know, aside from the help that we received from you and many other organizations, and the food bank, for example, communities came together to form mutual aid groups. And we saw the proliferation of community fridges. You know, now I have a community fridge in my district, in every neighborhood in my district. It's a beautiful thing. It's hard to keep stocked. You know, we're asking people to leave what they can, which is often not much, and to take what they need, which is often everything. And so I want to start dipping in some of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat about these community fridges. For example, Sarah says there are over 100 community fridges in New York City alone. That is an infrastructure of autonomous fridges that are running consistently and autonomously without funding. Well, they raise funding, and all the bureaucratic tape that you find in bloated nonprofits. What is the relationship of the city and City Harvest with the community fridges? Are you guys taking part in any of these collectives?
I can start with that and hope I don't get bumped again. I actually had a pleasure of joining a fantastic group of Yemeni American youth, specifically to stock their fridge. And so again, through our PFRED program, we're able to provide some food resources that can help to support these emergent needs in communities. So it is extraordinary to see the emergence of these fridges, and also, as you spoke to, Senator, how these really are community organizations and community residents helping out each other. And it's really important to see. And also, if anybody is in need of food, certainly reach out to Food Reserve at hra.nyc.gov in connection to those fridges.
Okay. And I see Richard Cumming, who actually, he has an organization called Food Stream Network. He's a good friend of mine. He's been working very hard to help us connect the dots as well. I'm wondering, can you answer his question? He's asking for 3 key solutions that will improve access to more culturally relevant, nutritious food, which is very important in places like Queens, right? Where we have people from all over the world. I mean, we speak 160 languages here. How do you motivate communities to make healthier choices within that framing of you know, being culturally relevant?
You know, if I could jump in here, I would tell you what I have seen, and I have spent most of my career in the corporate world. It has been so refreshing coming to this side. And here's what I was probably most surprised about is that we actually collectively have all the answers. We need platforms that allow for better collaboration, where we can work together. And often the efforts that we do collectively, there's not a complete meshing of those efforts. And so where we may be able to solve one piece of it, there usually is an entire story for that family or that home or that individual. And I think until we do that, it's really hard to provide a complete solve or solution for a family with children or senior household, et cetera. So I think collaboration is a big part of in that question. I heard, how do we connect the dots? And I think there has to be a venue for better collaboration to allow for that. And I think everybody's doing great work. There has to be that forum that really brings us together. The other part of your question that I think I missed out on a little earlier is that we just have to acknowledge this is an accessibility or an inequity issue. And whenever accessibility and inequity comes into play in the life of a person, there will be a season of hunger. There just will be. And we see story after story that tells us that. And so before you can provide culturally competent meals or to food in a person's neighborhood, you got to be able to look up and see that there are actually grocery stores in the neighborhood. You have to be able to look up and see that there are farmers markets and in the neighborhoods. And so when we look in our system at food deserts, I love your word, food apartheid. When we look at those areas in our system, we're not just looking for those. We're also looking for areas where the poverty rate is at least 2 times greater than the national average. They sync up. And so to be able to provide the right type of food, just the right food in and of itself, not even including the layer of cultural competence, there has to be access to that food in the neighborhoods where folks live. And if you're asking them to go out and get it, and there's not walkability or access to that food, you're asking for a lot. You can ask them to be healthy, but if there's not green spaces in the neighborhood, it's the same issue.
Well, Rick, let me just kind of zero in on something. What about for people with disabilities? You know, how much harder is it for people with disabilities or with limited mobility? Even in the advent of, companies being able to deliver, Amazon, Whole Foods, whatever, by the way, Whole Foods is non-union. How can we help people with disabilities?
That was the biggest learning, I think, for all of us. You've heard Racine and Kate and myself talk about how we had to pivot to getting food to the right places. And I think that caught a lot of us off guard. Since we are a virtual platform, when we looked at the number of folks that came and asked us for food, more than 70,000 people, and we fed over 100,000 households just since the pandemic. What was interesting is that we never solicited. We were just out there, and more than 70% of them were dealing with chronic illnesses. So they came to us. I would love to say we were smart enough for that to be a solution. People were just looking for contactless services to safely get food. And so that's a need we met, but so did City Harvest and the city. We're all trying to respond to that need. But clearly what it says to me is the Amazons and the Instacarts of the world, you hit it. They're not delivering into, on our map, what are the pink areas? They're not delivering there.
Fascinating. Sounds like we're going to have a little chat with them. Well, listen, we have about 5 minutes left, and we have 6 questions open here in the Q&A. So we're going to breeze through these kind of like a lightning round. All right. Sarah is asking Racine, you mentioned you were in charge of repacking for food distribution at the pantry in the Bronx. The packing is more often than not in large 50-pound bags from the warehouse that volunteers struggle with. Produce is very often rotting or bags and bags of high sodium canned food, and now have been told I'm guessing CH City Hall pandemic contract is ending. Can you please give us a direct contact to discuss this?
I'm sorry if I misunderstand the question.
And perhaps you can, hey, Racine, perhaps you can actually tackle the next question too. How does a site become one for your donation sites?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as if I'm understanding the question correctly, how to get in contact for the repack program as far as what's going in the bag. Did I get that question correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's written in the Q&A chat that you should.
Okay, so I can just.
Sarah's saying that she's talking about the pantry in the Bronx, and that I guess packing can be very difficult for the volunteers because they're 50-pound bags, and that produce is often rotting, or it has, it's cans of high sodium food. And I guess there's concern. I guess there's lots of concerns in this question, and also that the pandemic contract is ending. And actually, in the chat, there are many questions about funding and how funding for a lot of these emergency programs is running out. So Racine, maybe you can address that part, and then Kate, maybe you can talk about funding for these emergency food programs that we've had to come up with.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of give context about the repack program. So majority of what we distribute is produce because we're really focused on nutrient dense items, just because we know that a lot of the clients that we serve have diet related illnesses. So it's really important that majority of what we distribute is produce. And addressing the poundage for the bags, our team makes sure that each bag weighs no more than 10 to 15 pounds, because we do realize that there are a lot of seniors that are on the line, those with disabilities, and a lot of the times they don't have the resources to pick up the items because they're too heavy, like a shopping cart or something like that. They don't have those items to pick up. So it's really important for us to make sure that they're easy to carry. So they're not 50 pounds, they're about 10 to 15 pounds. And then as far as addressing, so I think I addressed the high sodium items. What we do is when we source for or purchase our items to put in the bags, we ensure that they are low sodium, that they are vegetable or protein that can be put in a can, and then we create an assortment that can create a meal in those bags. So I hope I answered that question correctly. And then
I hope so too, because we're running out of time, and I'm going to actually switch it over to Kate to talk a little bit about the funding idea, and kind of merge into Raj's question about the philanthropic sector, and how we can better partner to uplift all of the work that the community fridges, the mutual groups, and all of these collectives have been doing.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to make that bridge. So I think to be clear, we are not, the city is not ending I think that was CH, the city harvest, I'm not sure, but to be, we are still operating Get Food emergency home delivery. I will say that really fortunately, as we continue to track the participation in that program, it's going down, right? Because the city is opening up and people are starting to leave their homes, I hope, in ways that are safe because people are vaccinated and restaurants are open for business. So that's extraordinary. And of course, we're watching closely at our federal FEMA, and when any emergencies would be ending. So we're watching all of that closely, but everything is still operating as it has been. I'm going to give one shout out. We're hoping, we are launching a new program probably in the late summer, early fall, intended to be a recovery program for clients of ours who are customers of Get Food, meaning that they've been getting emergency home deliveries, and we want to start to turn them more on to subsidized groceries. So that's something that we'll be launching in the, as I mentioned, sort of late summer, early fall. And finally, Raj, totally appreciate your question. It's great to hear from you again. How can the philanthropic community help support? I think particularly Robin Hood has done such a great job at supporting local grassroots organizations who are innovating and trying things differently. And I think that's exactly the right place for philanthropy. Getting in on pilots and opportunities to reach these different populations, people who have never gone to kitchens and pantries before, people who are, we've talked about, I think, Senator, that was you who raised people with disabilities, and how we serve these new populations who are new to needing food in ways that are accommodating of time and culture. So I think, to sum that up, philanthropic community can of course listen to as it does community groups and help look at small pilots that have the potential to go citywide, because this city is so vast and that we can't have a one-size-fits-all solution.
Kate, what about the delay after calling 311? Ariadna,
I didn't see that.
Ariadna, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, my apologies if I'm not, Miss Phillips, says that, we see families go without food due to the delay after calling 311.
Thank you for that. I have not heard. I know that, a year ago at this time, there were huge 311 backlogs, and that has supposedly been cleared, but I will look into that this afternoon. And once again, if you know anyone who is in need of food, cannot leave their home, yes, 311 is an option, or nyc.gov/getfood.
Okay. Well, clearly this isn't enough time for this conversation. Clearly, we could probably sit here all day. I think what the pandemic really did was expose how disconnected our food supply chain is. I mean, we already knew there was hunger. Obviously, we already knew there was poverty. We already knew that there were these hardships. But because government hasn't traditionally been so responsive to our food needs, we saw community fridge collectives and different types of mutual aid groups be born in our communities out of necessity, with what little we have in order to figure out how to fill those voids. And clearly, I mean, from what I see in the chat, there is a lot of disconnect in the much needed funding in order for these programs to continue. And so I think this is just the beginning. I hope this is just the beginning, because this is a big problem that we need to solve. I mean, going back to the importance of food in our lives, it's a determining factor for health outcomes, right? In many communities, like the Latinx community, right, where diabetes is high, where we have serious issues with heart disease, and all sorts of stuff. These are the things that we can tackle in order to keep people healthier, and in every single way, in every way. So I want to thank first our audience. I want to thank everyone who participated in the chat with your excellent questions, shedding light on everything that the community had to do in order to provide food. But of course, I also want to thank the panelists. Kate, the city, stepped up and tried to figure things out in an unprecedented way during an unprecedented time. Obviously, nobody was ready for what was to happen. But there's a lot of lessons coming out of here. And I think a lot of work for us as policymakers and policy implementers to figure out how we can keep New Yorkers fed. Racine, thank you for everything that City Harvest does. Please do look into, the volunteer situation. Rick, I think that the way we've been able to start integrating technology into this is really what's going to lead to the solutions, right? Because technology will allow us to bridge those gaps better. And so thank you to everyone for your time today. I'm sorry we went a little over. But thank you for joining us, and hopefully this is only the start of our conversation. I see we have some mutual aid exists because government structures like Ramos's office fail their constituency. This is survival work. I'm sorry that you feel that way. I was working very hard not only to distribute food on our own when we could, when it was made available. We also raised money for the community fridge that we handed over to the East Elmhurst Community School, which is now administering it. And also I passed the Fund for Excluded Workers, which is $2.1 billion in order to help folks who were not able to qualify for unemployment insurance and found themselves on many of these food lines, unfortunately. I'm really hoping with the Department of Labor, we'll be able to launch that program later this summer. Unfortunately, the DOL has its own struggles, but I do want to be very clear and very transparent about this, because I'm someone who I'm happy to receive feedback, whether it's constructive or not. But I also like to operate in truths. So I appreciate everyone's concern. Obviously, we're all here because we care about food and because we care about people. And I think we can all work harder in constructive ways in order to solve this very important issue. So thank you all for being here, and hopefully we'll see each other soon, and maybe even in person. All right. Bye, everyone. Take care.